cross-country skiing with the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a short Dogman story I can tell you. One of the things about my story that's different from most is that mine took place entirely during the day. In fact, it was a very bright and sunny day, almost blindingly bright. My wife and I were in the first year of our marriage back in 1970. Her side of the family was quite a bit wealthier in those days, although I don't suppose that's still true these days. A half-century of indulgence has left the younger generation with little to show over their grandparents' former wealth. Although I had a good job back then with a company that still exists even as I write this, Mona's relatives felt bad for her, having to marry someone who actually had a job rather than living off their inheritance. As a result, we often found ourselves house-sitting mansions. They'd let us live there for free, throwing some money at us as payment for doing them such a big favor. Obviously, they were doing us the favors, but they were favors we never really asked them for. So my resentment grew rather than my gratitude, if you know what I mean. Nevertheless, in that year of 1970, I was quite happy to spend Christmas week at my wife's Uncle Harry's house up in the Catskills Mountains, which are in upstate New York. Harry had bought the house specifically because of his wife's love for cross-country skiing, but then she left him and moved to Hawaii. He came to intensely dislike snow, and that's really all there was in the winter in the Catskills. It's one of the best places in the world for cross-country skiing, and Harry had left some of the finest skiing equipment available in those days for us to use while he was gone. One day, Mona and I went out into the glaringly bright sunlight, and we made it about 10 minutes out there before I felt as though I was growing tired and cold and snowblind, so we headed back. The next morning, she showed me how to dress more warmly for this kind of sport, and she gave me these special shaded goggles to help me stand the bright sun better. This time we got about 20 minutes into our skiing before I needed a break. At first I was thinking I could go on further, but once I stopped, the tiredness really set in, and I realized it would be dangerous to continue. But while we were stopped at that spot in the snow, I saw a figure off in the distance. He or she was a very tall humanoid silhouette, standing toward the east, where the morning sky was brightest. I pointed the figure out to Mona, but she hadn't brought shades with her and couldn't really make out what I was pointing to. I realized that we didn't own the Catskills, and I had no right to be uncomfortable about somebody else being out there in the snow, especially that far off in the distance. Nevertheless, something about that figure made me nervous, and I was happy to be heading back. The third day, I was really achy from exercising more than I was used to, so I stayed in Uncle Harry's sauna. Poor me. The fourth or fifth day, though, we were back at it, cross-country skiing in the snow. This time, we were only about 17 or 18 minutes into our jaunt when I saw that figure again, off in the distance. I asked Mona if she would mind if we headed back, but she insisted we should go the full 20 minutes as we had originally planned. Obviously, she was in better shape than I was, but in those days, it was a shameful thing for a husband to be outdone by his wife in terms of sports, so I pressed on, as I had been socially conditioned to do. As we slid and stomped along, depending on the incline, I kept my eyes on that figure. It was definitely approaching us, and the closer I got, the more I wanted to turn and run. This was purely instinct, as I still could not make out details about that man. It couldn't be a woman. It was so large, like a bear, or maybe larger. The idea that it might be a Bigfoot shot through my body along with a sharp spike in adrenaline. I stopped and looked as hard as I could at that man. Don't get me wrong, I didn't even believe in Bigfoot in those days. I don't think I had any interesting or unique ideas or beliefs back then. I was an executive in a big company. In those days, that didn't mean tweeting about the revolution. It meant dressing in suits and thinking in the most boring way possible. I didn't think too much about Bigfoot because I didn't want to be different from the norm. However, if you take the man out of the office and stick him in the middle of nowhere, you'd be surprised how soon he'd start to accept that maybe Bigfoot might be a real thing after all. When you're out in the Catskill Mountains surrounded by nature and snow, you're in a mythic landscape, and anything feels like it could possibly happen. I pointed the figure out to Mona, and this time she actually could see what I was pointing at. I expected her to tell me that, oh, that's this neighbor or that's that neighbor. She had been coming to this place since her teen years. I hoped she would calm my fears that this figure was someone or something that we should be afraid of. Well, Mona stared off at that humanoid silhouette for a bit longer than I expected her to. When she finally did speak again, she didn't sound as sure of herself as I had hoped. That's a really big man, isn't it? She stated the question more than asked it, and her voice sounded nervous. We immediately started back, and I got the vibe that she was thinking the same thing I was. After all, she had actually told me that one of her relatives claimed to have seen a Sasquatch just outside of Germantown, which was on the other side of the Hudson, maybe 30 or 40 miles to the east as the crow flies. Even if she hadn't taken that story seriously before, we both felt very exposed and vulnerable that morning, and I think we were both concerned about that creature or person following us. Which it did. Follow us, I mean. Each time we looked back, it seemed to be gaining on us, and we kept trying to increase our speed. Both of us were running out of energy, and we started slowing down. The creature was gaining on us to the point that now, when we looked behind, we could see a much more fully formed silhouette. If that was a Bigfoot, it was a kind of a Bigfoot with pointed ears on top of its head. This was even more frightening to me than if I were seeing confirmation of it being a Sasquatch. At least I had heard of a Sasquatch. I had never heard of a giant man with dog ears up on top of his head. The idea of that was a complete unknown, and if you don't know anything about something, it's 10 times as frightening. Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. I was nervous for myself, but even more so for my wife. We had not had any of our children yet. We had our whole lives ahead of us, and I needed to get her to safety. It was my biological imperative, as they say. To call my condition stressed out would be quite an understatement. By the time we had the house in our sights, our pursuer was close enough that we could make out that his size was even larger than what we had first interpreted it to be. He had been mostly walking in white snow for as far as the eye could see. He wasn't walking past things that we knew the size of, and it had been hard to tell exactly how big the creature was. By this point, I would have been putting his size in the range of 13 or 14 feet, from the tips of its toes down below to the tips of its ears up on top. I couldn't make out much detail in the face yet, but I could see its eyes reflecting back the bright white snow all around it. It looked like a dog, and yet it looked like a man, and yet it looked like a bear. It was larger than a bear, that was for certain. Each time I turned and saw it there, I felt a little more sick and a little more frightened. We only had one final sprint to get back to my wife's uncle's house, really, and once we were inside, I figured we'd be safe. That dog-headed giant man behind us seemed to be getting closer to us faster than we were getting closer to the house, and I began to feel as though this were a race we were going to lose. That was when Mona had her panic attack and started hyperventilating. That to me seemed to spell our doom. There was no way we were going to get away, so I may as well make my wife's final moments as pleasant as I could. I spoke to her calmly and lovingly. I told her we were fine, and we had plenty of time to get away. She turned nervously to look back at the dogman catching up to us, but I blocked her view with my body, and I smiled at her. I can watch behind for both of us, I told her. You just look at your Uncle Harry's house. You focus on getting there, one step at a time. She looked back at me skeptically, but I kept smiling and speaking in a calming tone until her breathing became a little more normal, and she went back to stomping through the snow on her skis. I saw a hill coming up and wrapped an arm around my wife's back as I accelerated. Then we both slid down this hill on our skis, giving us back a bit of the lead we had been losing. The Dogman seemed to be holding to a steady pace, but he was not able to slide down hills. If anything, he slowed down a bit to avoid slipping when going down. So, I discovered one advantage we had over the much larger creature. "How far away is that dog-headed Bigfoot?" asked Mona. I told her it was still far behind us. But it was close behind us. In fact, it was so close that I could begin to hear it growling. Mona heard it too, and she told me so, with panic in her voice. I told her I didn't know what she was referring to, but that only agitated her. "The growling," she snarled. "The growling from behind us. Don't even try to tell me you aren't hearing that." She was being good and not looking over her shoulder. She was facing forward while she said all that, but she was about to lose her trust in me if I lied to her again. I tried to think of what to do, but all I could think of was to lie even bigger. "Oh, that?" I asked, trying to sound bored. "That's not growling. That's just a snowmobile off in the distance." "Really?" asked Mona, sounding as though she might almost be believing me. "Then why does it sound so close by?" "You know these mountains and valleys produce weird echoes sometimes," I reminded her. She had really told me that, and mentioning this seemed to calm her down a bit. Meanwhile, I looked over my shoulder, and what I saw froze me down to the bone. This thing wasn't just a really big man with a dog-like head. It was a behemoth of staggering proportions. It looked stronger than an ox, and its arms were more massive than those of the most steroided-out bodybuilder. The first time I really focused on those arms, I nearly dropped into a faint, but that wasn't an option. You can will yourself to bear up to almost anything when you have someone else that you need to protect. And I needed to protect Mona. I could for the first time make out details on the face, including its long dog snout. It breathed out thick white smoke into the cold air, reminding me more than a little bit of a dragon, albeit a big hairy bipedal one. The legs were canine, but they walked like a human, or almost like one. The posture was more human than ape-like, and it wasn't like a bear at all. Bears either stand directly upright in a stiff fashion or else down on all fours, but this creature was able to adopt all kinds of different postures. It could stand all the way up when it wanted to look at something far off, but it often bent over at the shoulders or the waist, similar to how humans do it. The front arms, besides being impossibly muscular, were also extra long. It didn't need to bend very far at all to pick things up off the ground, or to run its claws through the snow. I didn't want those claws coming anywhere near my wife, and I kept her moving forward through gentle but persistent nudging and encouragement. We were fortunate that much of the rest of the way was downhill. That caused the beast to slow down and us to speed up. Soon we were tramping inside and locking up behind ourselves before settling down to the process of getting those skis off our feet. While we were doing that, something slammed into our door from the outside. Mona lost it and started screaming at the top of her lungs, which caused whatever was outside to bang even harder. I finished taking my skis off and went to work removing them from my wife as well, since she was too busy screaming, louder and louder. Soon it was such a racket between her shouting in fear and the dogman outside trying to get in that my ears were ringing. If I had thought that getting inside would end this episode, I was clearly way off base. Once the skis were off, I lifted Mona up and brought her inside the house, but it was like trying to carry a wild bobcat. She wriggled away from me and ran to hide under the dining room table. I figured that was as good as any place else for the time being, and I just left her there. I didn't hear the dogman at the back door anymore, and I wanted to know why. So, it was my turn to run around like a chicken with my head cut off. I looked out of each window, looking out to see where the beast man had gone, but I wasn't seeing him anywhere. Then, the house shook, and my wife screamed again, not once, but continually and over. It sounded like we had been hit hard from the opposite side of the house, so that was where I ran. By the time I reached a window looking outside over there, though, there was a loud banging sound coming from where I'd just come from. Meanwhile, Mona's screams were getting more deranged, and her voice was growing hoarse. I cleared some chairs away and encouraged her to come out from under the dining room table. As she began crawling in my direction, though, a loud banging came from the back of the house, and Mona reverted instantly to screaming mode. Losing my patience, I dragged her out from under the table as gently as I could under the circumstances. Picking her up in my arms again, I ran upstairs with her and plopped her on our bed. I told her to lock the bedroom door behind me, and she freaked out about the idea of being locked in. I nearly lost my temper at her, but I bit my tongue, and I thought about it for a second. Mona in those days used to identify strongly with Linda McCartney, and she had taken up photography because that was what Linda did. I grabbed her camera off the night table, and I looked Mona right in the eyes, very seriously. I told her, Mona, nobody has ever seen a creature like that huge dog-headed ape-man before, and for all we know, nobody will ever see it again. I don't know the first thing about photography, so that means it's up to you, Mona, to capture an image of that thing on film. She seemed to be calming down, and she seemed to be listening to what I was saying. She began repeating back to me parts of what I was saying to her. It's up to me, she said in a dazed fashion. Yes, Mona, it's up to you and you alone. Are you brave enough to do what needs to be done? She looked confused at first in her state of semi-shock, but then a determined look replaced that, and I began to see the woman I married returning to the land of the living. I can do this, she said, probably more to herself than to me, and then she added, as long as I can stay upstairs here to do it. So I watched as my wife went from room to room on the second floor, looking out the windows, searching for the dogman. I was proud of her that she pulled herself together, and I began to steel my own nerves, since I had to go downstairs alone to deal with the dogman on that level. Only it dawned on me that I hadn't heard the sound of banging for some time. I didn't hear anything coming from outside at all. Going downstairs with my binoculars and searching outside each and every window 2 times each, I began to be certain that the creature must have moved on. Unbeknownst to me, my wife Mona had walked downstairs silently in her stocking feet and spoke behind me before I knew she was even there. I was so surprised, I accidentally flung the binoculars across the room and knocked her uncle's cuckoo clock right off the wall. It was so funny to us in that moment that we both collapsed into hysterical laughter. I mean, it wasn't really as funny as all that, but after such a terrifying and seemingly endless experience, we laughed long and hard, as much out of relief as out of finding the incident actually humorous. When I finally caught my breath, I asked Mona to repeat whatever she had said that caused me to throw the binoculars in the first place. Mona repeated that she and her camera had scared the big bad wolf away. He acted so tough, but in actuality, he was too shy to even be photographed. It was almost as though he was more afraid of having his picture taken than anything else we could have threatened him with. You know, I loved cross-country skiing, and so did Mona, but we never went out there ever again. It's a great sport and a fun activity, and I would recommend that if you're healthy enough, you should give it a whirl and see what you think. But if you do, be more selective than Mona and I were about who you share your skiing time with. And above all, whatever you do, never ever go cross-country skiing with the Dogman. In the old days, people used to celebrate Christmas with scary stories. That's why this year, we're bringing you the 12 Days of Dogman. From Monday, December 13th through Christmas Evil, we'll bring you another full episode of Dogman Encounter stories each day. And then, on Christmas Day, we'll make it a baker's dozen. The 12 Days of Dogman, right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel, bringing you scary tidings and Christmas fear. The nose knows, I suppose, just like a rose that grows and grows. This executive producer keeps us on our toes, and we come out smelling like S.A. Rose. Please join us in thanking S.A. Rose for making this episode possible. In return, they get to see all our secret, uncensored Dogman stories, far too wild to ever tell on this channel. They also get to see our 21 hours or more of archived, scary, uncensored Dogman stories and a weekly sneak advance preview. And you can get all these perks too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or else click that join link under this or any of our videos to become a channel member. Now, here's TV spokesdog Henry Lee Dogman with the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.